Welcome ACS members, thank you for joining us this morning on a Friday. Very important occasion. We've got a very snappy 45-minute live stream on collaboration and innovation, led by ACS President Johan Ramasundara and Queensland's Chief Entrepreneur Steve Baxter. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Johan, we must start with you. You've just returned from a trip to Israel. Would you like to share with ACS members what you took away as some key learnings?
Yes. The ACS has a vision to make sure Australia has the technology talent to make sure that Australia is able to foster innovation and create new forms of value. And this is our first ever mission to Israel. And so we tried to keep it to a minimum viable delegation. We took 3 delegates, so myself, Andrew Johnson, CEO, as well as Trent Zimmerman, the Member for Parliament for North Sydney. And the key takeaways for me was the Israeli culture, especially the military and the influence of the mandatory military that had on the innovation culture. The famous 8200 cybersecurity people who come and graduate out of 8200 forces, and their demand and their input and how they add value to the ecosystem, as well as some of the Jewish culture where they actually help each other. And they were all helping the innovation ecosystem. The learnings from the military was really important to me. I thought that was crucial. Teamwork, and at such a young age, they're able to take responsibility and accountability for $1 million aircraft in certain instances. So if they joined the military at 18 years of age, by the time they finish 3 years, 21 years of age, you have somebody who's got real life experience with a mission, who's had their lives, their own as well as their team's lives in danger or not, and then they've been able to bring that experience into some of the entrepreneurial aspects, let's say to real life business problem solving. So that was a key takeaway for me. And we also looked at robotics, artificial intelligence, and the deep learning. Some of the deep learning related startups were fascinating, at the same time a little bit scary where the world's going. So they were some of the takeaways for me.
Fantastic. Steve, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're streaming from River City Labs. Could you share with ACS members a little bit of the River City Labs story and some of the successes achieved to date?
Yeah, look, thanks Andrew. I started River City Labs 6 years ago, different building to here, but very close by. I saw a gap in the market. I actually saw a gap in society, in Brisbane especially, with respect to support for early stage entrepreneurs. I wanted to start something that was net helpful to them. I purposely did that as a not-for-profit organisation because I wanted members, not customers. I thought that was an important distinction, and ACS would be probably familiar with that concept. And we've learned a lot over 6 years. We're in our second building. We've helped over 700 entrepreneurs or startups. We've had close to 30,000 people come through the doors, and we've hosted a dizzying range of events. And I think the biggest thing we've learned is we've just got to get people together in a room, talking, understanding. It's very rare we ever come across 2 businesses that compete with each other, although they all do. They all think they compete. So just get there, talk, understand, network. On that journey, we found out there's lots of gaps in the market, and I think that the biggest gap we see is always people. So tech startup, the feedstock for tech startup is smart technical people. And ACS has 45,000 of those as members. So we'd like to actually take that tech story, that early stage startup, global, high growth global company story out to ACS, out to everyone through ACS, and leverage I think the best parts of both organisations. So that's a new phase of RCL. It's been going 6 years. We're about to kick off the next 6 years, let's say. Maybe 5-year plans. It's a bit of a thing in the world, isn't it? So let's move the dial. Let's have more of these global sort of tech giants formed out of and housed in Australia.
Fantastic. Johan, you made an important announcement for ACS Wednesday earlier this week. For ACS members who have missed that announcement, would you like to just share what that was about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wednesday I was in Uluru announcing the first ever Indigenous scholarship for Indigenous ICT students. So that was really important, I thought, for Australia to recognise the Indigenous contribution to the ICT world, as well as inspiring new Indigenous communities as well as Indigenous students to take on, consider ICT careers. Because rather than us trying to determine what is good for them, it's really important when an Indigenous person is able to come up with, use ICT to come up with solving their problems, and that will actually go a long way.
Fantastic. So you're looking to build a culture in particularly rural and remote areas. Just wanted to focus on culture for a second with Steve. Culture, a big focus for Startup Catalyst, Steve. Again, for ACS members who might not be fully aware of what Startup Catalyst does, could you share a bit of its mission and how it goes about its business?
Yeah, well, so I started Startup Catalyst from the frustration of being pitched lots of what sounded like really good ideas by essentially technically clueless people. And I thought, well, it's proudly clueless people, actually, to be honest. So, and I thought, well, we can't, and we couldn't seem to take these people without the technical skills and convince them they had to go and get them, which I found crazy. So I realised that in order to get the better outsized outcomes, we had to find the technical people and make them globally aware. So the foundation program of Startup Catalyst was still is a youth mission where we take 20, it's hard to say this, 20 people who are 29 or less to Silicon Valley for about 2 weeks. We take them to Google and Twitter and Facebook. It's a real tech tourism tour, but we literally go over there and we burst any apprehension they've got, any comprehension they've got that their market or their business should only be in Australia. We show them what other people around the world are doing, how fast they're doing it, how probably their skills are better than the average person in Silicon Valley. They're way better than the average person in Silicon Valley, and that they should just stop working on something small and start working on something big. So Catalyst doesn't just do that. We also do programs for funded startups. We've done ag tech missions to Israel. We've done female founders missions to London and other missions to London as well. So I'd like to acknowledge the help that the UK trade and invest folk give on that one, because that's invaluable. So Startup Catalyst is about culturally transforming the smartest technical people we can get our hands on, get them working on big stuff as opposed to small stuff.
Fantastic. For ACS members joining us remotely, if you want to ask questions of either Johan or Steve throughout the session, please send your questions through our Twitter at ACS Newsfeed. Johan, I believe there's another announcement that you'd like to make today to share with ACS members.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to announce the collaboration between ACS and RCL, River City Labs. Today we announced that the ACS acquired River City Labs. Steve's been an amazing person. His startup, his vision that started in 2012 is now ready to mature and go into the next stage. So we look forward to the synergies between the two organisations, River City Labs and ACS, and what it means for the ACS members is that they get access to the River City Labs ecosystem, the startup culture that they have, the resources is going to be phenomenal, and vice versa. So the River City Labs staff and the participants actually get access to ACS and the reach. So it's a very, very good outcome for both organisations as well as for Australia.
Thank you. Steve, could you perhaps just go through some of the background as to how we find ourselves here today?
Yeah, sure. So it sort of started, I received a couple of approaches to purchase River City Labs back late last year, early this year, and that got me thinking. It got me thinking that probably I was probably not doing the appropriate thing with the labs. I had great staff here, but in that strategically they might have been a bit leaderless, and it's all my fault. And with that realisation, I thought, well, I have to find the new organisation to operate, own, and love RCL and its mission. So we started an expression of interest earlier in the year. We received well over a dozen responses. Probably about a dozen, maybe 13 serious ones. We quickly, with a couple of rounds, we cut that down to 6 and then 4. And honestly, ACS stood out. And it was at one point in that process that I realised that I really should have been talking to ACS years before about just generally working together. The the level of members that you have in the organisation is truly staggering. So we need to leverage that. So let's not talk about the last 6 or 8 weeks of due diligence and deal docs, Andy, because none of us are going to forget that. But we got there in the end at about 6:50 p.m. last night, which is even better, right? So yeah, these things always take forever. That's all. That's easy. So look, honestly, aside from both our sides of lawyers, I think we enjoy working through the process. So the best thing is that the team. Every good startup's about a team. Every good business is about a team. So the team at Riverside Labs is bloody phenomenal, to be honest. That they've taken a couple of years of probably my inattention and just gone ahead anyway, which is great. So full props to them. Given the resources, not just the resources, but given the desire for ACS to do something bigger, I think is the more important thing. So it was a long process. I thank all the professionals from both sides. Now they can get out of the room and we can start doing real things. That'd be great.
Excellent. Johan, why is this an important initiative for ACS?
Well, from an ACS perspective, like I mentioned earlier, the ACS's vision to be seeing Australia as a leader, we need to actually unlock the potential of the startups. This economy that we have currently, if you look at the top 2 exports are still iron ore, and is actually not going to be helping Australia in moving into transitioning into the new economy. We seem to be just digging and exporting. Where are the smarts in the exports? So rather than blaming people and expecting other people to do things, the ACS has decided that as the membership change, the demographics change, and their expectations change, and more of our members are very entrepreneurial. So how do we help and make sure the next billion-dollar company startup is coming from an ACS member? So that's why we've decided to get into this partnership.
Excellent. Well, I'll throw that question to Steve. Steve, what do we need to do to get more talent focused on high growth tech businesses?
Yeah, look, we need to introduce them to the opportunity. I always say that the hardest problem is going from 0 to 1 to starting a business. So the raw material that ACS has got, to talk in sort of gross terms about it, is the people, is the membership base. So we need to be able to market the opportunity of their own business, global, what I call a high growth global company. That's a tech startup, right? So, I've forgotten the question I'm answering, sorry, Andy.
How do we get more talent interested in building?
Yeah, cool. So you've got the talent there. So it's up to us. It's up to us to lose this opportunity. So we need to take that. We need to inform them. We need to provide value to them. So you always should provide value in everything that you do. So it's how we find that. And Peter Ellis made some good comments here earlier today. She said that we're going to start slow. We're going to understand what works for the various geographies, for the various groups, knowing that the ACS membership isn't a homogenous thing. It'll be strated and sectored. So we need to understand that, how best we can market to those in order to get them to do that. We need to probably understand, I'm shooting from the hip here, Andy, to make sure that the services ACS offers are relevant to let's say, tech people in a tech startup. So I'm not too sure they care about the public liability insurance. They should, but they should care about it. So maybe we need to educate them on that, or there's something else they need. They might need, it might be, okay, let's once a year get an hour with a lawyer regarding term sheets, or whatever it might be, how to raise money. So the mix of services, I think, will actually probably alter, or we'll consider to be altered over the period of time. I'm a huge fan of saying no one gets an opinion about your business other than the customer. In that respect, the customers of ACS are probably its members, and so we need to listen to them to see what they want, and we need to provide that. And if we're having a part of if ACS is having, I'm speaking like I'm owning it here, aren't I? If we're having a part of the business as being more focused on tech startup or early stage entrepreneurship, then we need to listen to that sector. But also there's traditional business that won't do that. So we need to understand the strata inside ACS, make sure we position the services appropriately so we get more to make that leap into that more, as far as I'm concerned, more exciting stuff. We want to run your own business or write database connectors for CBA. I reckon run your own business, right? It's far better.
Couldn't agree more. Johan, where do you see the economic growth opportunities enabled by tech in Australia?
Well, I think the economic opportunities for Australia is going to come from tech. We as a country need to have more of a vision for the country. We can't be everything to everyone, and there are some of the lessons I certainly also learned from being exposed to other innovation ecosystems and more mature innovation ecosystems. what is the vision for Australia? And if I ask 20 people, I might get about 30 different answers. So one of the other takeaways from Israeli experience is how everybody had the same narrative for Israel ecosystem. So Australia as a country, we really need to have a vision. Everybody needs to understand what we stand for, what are key areas, the technology areas that we're going to be investing in, whether it's AI, whether it's cybersecurity, all that. We need to understand the key areas we're going to be investing in.
Can I hijack that opinion?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Is it up to ACS to set that? I mean, the whole Henry Ford thing, I've asked people, they wanted, it would have been a faster horse, right?
Exactly.
So is it up to ACS to lead that discussion, or are we trying to, I mean, to me, the leadership position that ACS needs to take is that, okay, this is what we're going to do, whether, and there's a discussion around whether we stream on verticals, the whole thing, that's a valid discussion to have. But the reality is we need to deploy that membership, grow the membership, deploy the membership into exceptionally high value enterprise. And so maybe that's the discussion that someone needs to lead in that respect. And that's not a criticism.
No. I understand, but as a country, we need to understand where the country's vision is. So any organisation, let's say if you take a startup, the startup is very clear on their mission as to where they're going. And then as it grows, it becomes a lot harder to maintain that. But as a country, we should also understand what the country stands for. I mean, it was a lot easier back, let's say a few years ago or a few decades ago. Yes, we were exporting, mining was our number one export. But now, if we are to transition the economy, we need to understand what will be our exports in the next decade or 2 decades to go. So when countries like China and others come up with 50-year plans, we need to also be able to compete in that.
50, not get a 5-year plan, wouldn't a 50-year plan.
That's right, that's right. So I think it is really important to have a plan as a country. But what we need to do, like you said, from an ACS perspective, yes, certainly having the conversation and growing the ecosystem. And like I said earlier, making sure that Australia has the billion-dollar, trillion-dollar startups is what we can do. So we will do our bit, but I think everybody needs to play their role, and collaboration is certainly the key.
So I'm seeing lots of congratulations and photos coming through on Twitter, but not so much of a question. So I'm going to throw open to the audience that's in attendance here today. If anyone has a question they would like to ask of Steve or Johan, please feel free to throw that out there. If not, I'm happy to go myself. No? Okay, so Steve, collaboration, it's a buzzword. In reality, what does it mean for a business? How is collaboration an important ingredient for success?
Yeah, look, it's very important, and that's easy to say. The real thing is how do you do it, and that's tough. And I think that the learning from Riverside Labs over the last 6 years is it's really hard. And there's one way to do it, and there's one good way to do it, and that basically means that you've got to. So I have a theory about conversations. So you have to have a $10,000 conversation, you've got to talk to 100 people. So you have to go and network with 100 people in order to get one $10,000 sale. To get a $100,000 conversation, it might be a sale, it might be an equity investment, you've got to talk to 1,000 people. To get your $1 million conversation, a big sale or a big investment, you've probably got to talk to 10,000 people. So to me, collaboration is about networking. It doesn't mean you have to talk to 10,000, you have to go to events where cumulatively you might find 10,000 people, and you've got to get there and network like crazy to understand what's what. So that's how collaboration starts. I've just travelled throughout central Queensland on a Chief Entrepreneur's mission, and I've done lots of these. And you see lots of goodwill out there of people wanting to bring local communities together to collaborate. I just know how bloody hard that is. You can't engineer that. You can't engineer conviviality, right? What we've done at Riverside Labs is we've just taken like 29,000 people through the doors in 6 years. We've smashed them together, sprinkled some pizza and beer on top. And that's actually the only way we've found that we've got some level of success. The throughput's horrible. Every other way's worse. So what this is, it's about grinding out these events, giving up the events which bring forward a lot of good value content and information to the community, but also at the same time gets people talking, understands who's who, have a chat to your competitor if they exist, have a chat to your most likely people on a similar path in a parallel industry, and understand what you can actually give to each other. And so yes, exceptionally important, but really, really bloody hard to do in a meaningful way.
Excellent. Johan, innovation, again, another buzzword. What does that mean in practice?
Well, innovation to me is any real change that adds value. So it's important that whatever we come up with as a new concept or a new product is actually adding value and solving a real problem. So it has been unfortunately misused, a word, all the time, and not many people understanding it. But it is certainly the key. I think the culture is the most important one. When you look at innovation, having that innovative culture, I think innovation most of the time can be intangible, that sort of culture. It is about, like Steve said, the collaboration is really important, and everybody in the ecosystems actually helping one another. So the academia, with the startup community, with the corporates, with the financial institutions, everybody actually having the interest, and ultimately everybody benefits. So in more mature ecosystems, I've never actually been knocked back a meeting. Everybody's willing to meet up with you because they are waiting to see what the other person's got to offer, and also ultimately they understand it would also benefit them and the country. So innovation to me is the innovative culture that we need to create.
I've got a theory on innovation. I think it's a false concept. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? Invention is not the mother of necessity. And most of the startups we see that balls it up, fail, and have some cool idea that they try and retrofit a problem to, right? And so that to me is what innovation is. You have a cool idea, you try and retrofit problems to. So that's really tough. To me, there is genuine innovation that happens, but it's how you spur the innovative reaction, and how you do that's with competition. So if you're in business and someone threatens your revenue, you need to change, right? And to me, that change spurs innovation. So for me to actually, when I lobby various sort of public officials, it's about, well, what I prefer to do is to encourage lots of people to start, the right people, very, very technically minded people, to start these amazing businesses. They'll threaten the incumbents, and this is also called disruption, and that will spur an innovative response, or they'll go away. And if they don't change, they should go away, right? So I do agree with innovation. I just think that trying to top-down innovation is just crazy, and it's led to the loss of a government, to be quite blunt, right? So, or at least the loss of a Prime Minister. The government will go next year. If you can actually spur it from the ground up, then I think that makes a lot more sense.
Do we have any questions from our audience?
Thanks. Colin Kinner from Startup OnRamp. I'm curious to know a bit about the ACS's track record and experience in working with tech startups. This is obviously an important transition for River City Labs, but I'm also interested in the transition for ACS in terms of how this fits with your strategic mission to support these kinds of businesses.
Sure. Out of our 45,000 members, there seems to be, the startup community seems to be the growing membership area. And I mentioned the vision, but under the vision we have, the strategic plan has 3 pillars for ACS. So one is making sure Australia has the right capacity, so the right number of technology professionals, and then capability, so making sure that we have the right capability in terms of skills for Australians to move forward and navigate through this 4th industrial revolution. And then the third one is catalyst. That means ACS playing the role of a catalyst to spur innovation. So that's where the RCL acquisition fits in, to make sure that we as an organisation, and like Steve said earlier too, there's no point in us talking about what somebody else is doing. We need to do our bit. And this is ACS doing our bit to make sure, one, it helps our members because they are more and more entrepreneurial, and more and more of the younger members who are coming through are demanding that. And we didn't see the need for us to go in and reinvent our own incubator recipe or accelerator recipe, because RCL certainly has a very tried and tested recipe. So let's leverage that one for the benefit of our members as well as RCL, and using our reach in every state and territory and the international influence and connections with government and corporates to benefit RCL community also. So we think it's a real win-win.
Any others? Steve, I might ask one. The VC market seems to have changed a lot in the last 5 years. Is capital still a barrier for growth?
There's a perception that it is. I'm leaning towards it may be. I still think we have a deal flow problem. I don't think we have enough investable opportunities to support a very, very robust, the various stratas of that financing. You have angel, you have VC, you have seed investors. It's a strata of industry, of investment capital there. I'd like to see us with probably 5 times as many startups before we could definitively say, just because a startup doesn't get investment, it actually doesn't mean anything. It probably means they've got a shit business, right? So, so that is, I mean, you do see examples of otherwise good businesses maybe not getting financing. You're trying to figure that out. But maybe you're wrong. Maybe they're not a good business at the same time. On that, as a part of River City Labs, we have Startup Catalyst. One of the missions we do there is the investor mission. So last November, I think it was, Aaron, I took 11 other investors over to San Fran for a week, and we visited the VC side of the valley as opposed to the startup side of the valley. We're doing that. You don't know this yet, but I'm going to announce it now. We're doing that again in February. At the same time, we're coordinating a general funded startups mission. So if you just want to go over and not so much a youth mission, but you want to go over and actually get that tech highlight tour, effectively understand what's happening, we're going to coordinate the two together in early February. So that's happening next year. So anyone who sees himself as an investor, and we only take high net worth investors. We actually want to qualify them. We don't want also Rands and Klingons. So we're doing that, and we did that, and that group we took over has done investments since they've actually latched on. They still invest as a cohort. It's been an amazing experience. So it's growing. There's lots of things out there to help solve that, but I still think I'm not definitively out there to say that we have an investment issue. I think we have a deal flow issue, to be honest.
Steve, I've seen sometimes Australian startups actually having to go to Sandhill Road or wherever to unlock that sort of capital.
Did they get it?
They have, and quite a lot of them have been, because what they believe is, in Australia you might get X amount, but you'd get 10x or more in US. Do you see a difference in the level of investment?
Well, very few businesses, anecdotally from my own experience, and very few businesses that I refuse to invest in, they've then sort of they usually spit the dummy, walk out the door and say, all right, I'm going to Silicon Valley to find money. None have. So at least in the current form, without a massive pivot, right? So if more had actually found that investment, I'd say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we don't have that money in Australia here. And there are examples out there. So I'm leaning towards it. We maybe do have it. I just don't think we have enough data to definitively say. So, but the reality is so now you're talking about a difference in funding styles, right? So we've got one business that's being valued at 15 times revenues on investment. You don't get that valuation in Australia. So they're funding from overseas for obvious reasons, because they're willing to pay it. So if you do have money in Australia, maybe startups are less willing to take it because it tends to be more investor friendly than founder friendly. I think Silicon Valley is just stupid. It's way off the dial to the other side. There's a mid ground. We are seeing more angel investing groups and seed funds and early stage VC funds, which is good. But for the most part, I'm not seeing a mass exodus of businesses. Talking stages. Now, if you've got a business that's growing 12% month on month and you've got $5 million in revenue, that's a business any VC in the world will fund, or depending if you're the bits and pieces, right? So you'll just travel the world to find the best value. So are they travelling the world to find the best value, or can't they genuinely get it in Australia? But we see other problems with businesses. A lot of businesses will actually incorporate as a Delaware company, which is a done thing. But given the investing rules in Australia, if you've actually got ESVCLP, I hate that term, but if your fund is actually accredited as an ESVCLP fund, you actually can't invest a certain portion of your cash in overseas companies. So a lot of these companies actually lock themselves out of Australian financing, which is really curious, if you know what I mean. So I'm leaning towards there maybe being. I don't think we have enough data to conclusively say it. So.
Johan, you spent 4 months in San Francisco in the startup scene there. What were your key takeaways?
There were a lot of similarities with, let's say, the Tel Aviv startup scene, but of course they didn't have the mandatory military exposure to the innovators there. One of the takeaways for me was easy access to capital. And there was a lot of money available, and what they keep saying is there's not enough good ideas. And people were willing to invest in some crazy ideas. everybody everybody had a startup. I felt like I was the only one who didn't have a startup. The Uber driver had a startup. Well, one Uber driver actually had 7 startups, and he sold, and he was working on the 8th one. So the culture of entrepreneurship is a little bit contagious because of everybody's involvement. Some of the lessons for me was the maturity of the university sector. So Stanford and UC Berkeley certainly had a very mature commercialization area that was really making sure that the research was commercialized. I think that's something that we in Australia could do a little bit more. We do some amazing R&D work, but that commercialization might not necessarily...
We do it exceptionally poorly in Australia, Johan. I mean, if
in the R&D?
In the commercialisation,
yes.
We do it exceptionally poorly. So the one thing we can fix is that university people work your stuff out with respect to commercialisation. It's horrible.
Yes, so they do some amazing R&D, but the commercialisation is something that we really need to improve compared to some of those countries. I wasn't going to be as harsh as you,
no.
but because
well, one being polite doesn't get things changed, to be honest, Johan. So prepare for the next couple of years, mate.
Well, there are pockets of excellence. So that's the other thing I found as different. So in Australia, we see pockets of excellence compared to a culture of excellence where a majority of the people are excelling. They were some of the things that I got exposed to, and the number of Australians there, over 50,000 Australians there, and so we have a huge presence in the Bay Area, and the Australians are usually well regarded. Our skills are well regarded, and the US investors in general really liked the Australian startups. They believe we're a lot more mature. Usually our startups apparently aim to make a profit a lot earlier than US startups. So that was a theme that they mentioned that they've observed. So overall, we are respected well.
The valuations are lower too.
No, valuations are lower. That's true.
Valuations are lower.
Yeah, valuations.
The valuations are valued just out of control.
Yes.
Well, on the question of investors, I was at a hardware hackathon pitch night last week or this week. I don't know. They all merged into one. And there was this amazing company there called Iridium Aerospace or something. Whoever was there would probably, yeah. And they had this horizontal flight transitioning to vertical flight drone thing. And they actually invented a service which was inspecting gas pipelines. They had this amazing piece of technology which they thought, in order to actually be attractive to Australian investors, they had to have a use case for. And I actually made the point that night that I was so disappointed that we're all gutless in Australia. Because what they should just be doing is look how cool our transitioning from vertical to or horizontal to vertical, whatever it was anyway, it flipped itself around, is. But instead they had to make up a story about servicing gas pipelines. And I thought, bloody hell, we're gutless. And so there's an attitude thing there. We're not quite as adventurous as I think we should be, to be quite honest. And that was a moment for me on the investing styles, that's for sure.
The other thing is in terms of selling our ideas, I thought the Americans actually were really good salesmen, and they were able to market the idea. They were able to market an idea that's half as good as an Australian idea quite well, and we probably sometimes a little bit too humble. So there are some of the things that we can learn from them.
Steve, just want to come back to your comment around Delaware. So it's reported that there's 50,000 Aussies living in San Francisco.
Good. We should convince Donald Trump to cancel the visa. What do you reckon? Hey, Donnie, cancel the E3. I don't want that to happen, but can you imagine 50,000 taking over Aussies coming home? Wouldn't that be? That'd be a shot in the arm, wouldn't it? So I'm now like, shit, they all hate me. Right, they all hate me. So
if Trump doesn't do that, what can we do to get some of that talent back?
And actually, I was at a conference years ago where Nicky Shivak, who's an amazing start mate, Blackbird, he made the saying that we shouldn't care about our kids, our young people, tech people going overseas and working any more than we should care about Harry Kewell going to the EPL and Nicole Kidman going to Hollywood. And I agree with that. The question is how soon do we get them back is really the question. And I like them going to the US. The E3 visas, there's got a 2-year cliff and there's some issues renewing it. Like, you can generally get it done, but every 2 years that person's got to make a decision what they do with their life. And that's actually pretty cool. So what can we do? We need to change things here. So we need positive outcomes here for them. I think part of the attraction with respect to ACS and RCL for me was the membership base and how we get that membership base deployed into tech startups. I believe we have a gap of We know we have a gap of tech workers inside of tech startups, let alone tech startups themselves. So we need to encourage the system. So I've often spoken, and we spoke about in the last video, about the Mike Cannon-Brookes plan, which is just go out to the top 200 universities in the world and say to the top 200 ICT grads, hey, here's your free visa. Come and work here for 2 years or 5 years, who cares what it is, right? We need that. We need those people here. So we probably need to do something similar in that expat space. How do we attract them back? They've got to have jobs to come to. There's a fantastic bloke we sing our Startup Catalyst program to in Facebook. He's Director of Performance Engineering at Facebook. Yeah, he just, where else can he go in Australia where he gets to look after, I don't know, 5 or 6 million servers and make PHP work 1% better every month, because that's his job, right? Where can you do that in Australia? That's the problem we've got. We actually don't have, if these people have been working on global scale problems, they're going to come back to businesses that aren't at that level yet. So there's a, I suppose there's a gap there of where's the desirable occupations for these people to slot back into.
The other thing is also the access to market. Our market is quite small compared to US market. So for a growing company, US is actually a much larger market. But we also have some other markets like China and India is growing, so those markets are also available to Australians, and we can service them from here. And like I said, when we were in Darwin, we were at we're very close to that real growth area. US is so far away. So if India is growing, how can we service from Australia the Asia Pacific region would be something that we should really explore. That's the growth area.
It's tough not to crack that. I mean, I've been at it for years, and I've been to China on trade missions, and the whole box and dice, right? I haven't done India, which would be good, but how do you? I mean, there's a common language-ish. We all sort of speak most of the same language. So what does it actually stops at? I mean, I know with India there's trade liberalisation going. India's the economy's been tough there for a while. I think they're opening up a lot more. China has its own special issues with respect to intellectual property, right? And that's often seen as a barrier, though. That's part of the problem. Yeah. So what are the barriers there? Because it is close, so what's the problem?
I think some of the problems I see is let's say the affordability, right? So if you have a product or a service that you're rolling out and scaling up, China is actually probably a lot more mature, and Chinese probably would be a lot more affordable than a country like, let's say, India yet. So the market pricing of it is crucial. But if you go to States, Dollar Valley, I mean, it's pretty much the same. The affordability is there, the mass is there, so going there is a lot more easier. There's also the cultural barriers, so it's really important to understand the cultural barriers. Moving from Australia to US, yes, there is a cultural difference, but it's not that much. But if you go from here to China or here to India, yes, there's tremendous cultural barriers. And especially in the Asian cultures, the trust is, I mean, in any business deal, trust is important, but in the Asian circles, it takes a little bit more to build trust. So there could be some of the barriers.
We have time for just one last question. Okay, we'll make that 2.
So we've got a question from Natalie Brown from Facebook. You mentioned the River City Labs group fosters the growth of tech scale-ups in Queensland. What is the strategy to roll this out across other states?
Well, it sounds like an ACS question at the moment, so...
Sure. The ACS, we moved to new premises in our head office in Sydney with the vision to have an accelerator. So we've already got 20 organisations there. So we will be moving into the accelerator space now with the River City Lab expertise. And we also plan to do the same in Melbourne. So the strategy is to leverage the ACS's expansion plans and also leverage the River City intellectual capital and what they have in the River City Labs to expand it at least to the main cities in the first instance, but let's see what the appetite is to move it across the country or even global. Andrew?
What I hope is there's so much actually happening around Australia, and there's a plan there obviously, but there's a lot of other organisations who are definitely not competitive with ACS, and so they already have the RCLs or the startup precincts out there, if you know what I mean. So being able to take once we understand what that content mix between what we're bringing to ACS is, being able to drop that into this wider network out there of the York butter factories or the fish burners or the Sydney startup hubs, whatever it might be, whatever works, I think is. That's a really enticing, because you get leverage that way. It's very hard to leverage. I've done it. It's very hard to leverage one piece of real estate. Let me tell you, getting that program out there is a lot better idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
We did have one more question down the front. Did I see a hand earlier?
Hi, my name's Kara Walsh, obviously American. One of the things that's been really interesting for me to observe since coming here 7 years ago is the government involvement in kind of managing entrepreneurship, which for me seems a bit crippling. So coming from the US, the government's something that's in your way, that you think about the regulations and how to overcome those hurdles, but I was never in a conversation in Silicon Valley or New York about how the government was going to fund us or how the government was going to help us. Now that we're kind of at that next level of maturity for RCL and the startups who've grown over the last 6 years, what do you guys see as the role government should play in getting out of the way or in kind of putting their hand in to help the startup community?
Yeah, well, for me, they should. So look, the government should take care of regulations, and be there for market failure. They've done a lot. The Advanced Queensland program in Queensland has been actually really good, because there was an absolute gap there. There's lots of common sense things that the government can do, for example, that will actually make tech in Australia better in general. Things like the parlour state of telecommunications is ridiculous. So in Queensland here, we're looking at the backhaul fibre network, which will hopefully fix regional telecoms if they ever get around to it. Kate and Anna, please get onto it. Generally, we just need to do something with the NBN boil. It needs to get lanced somehow. We need to move on from that, because it's actually holding us back. We can't actually participate in the tech startup revolution if we have the world's most expensive network to move a bit from here to there. That's the ridiculous part. So we need to, and actually that's a ground level basement. So if the government's going to do something, I'll give them two things: fix the network and get real on the skills gap we actually have with respect to this tech stuff. So let's divorce it from the stupid population debate and immigration debate we've got going on at the moment, and sort of saying, we just need lots of really smart people here, let's bring them in and let's take a punt on this, all right? If we're going to bring in 200,000 people every year, let's make 50,000 of IT grads. It might be hard to sell, but it'd be bloody interesting to see what happens afterwards. So that would be the two from me.
I think the legislative framework in most countries, if not all countries, really need to be more forward-looking, because it's all pre-tech, most of it, and now we're trying to retrofit quite a lot of it. But while you actually have forward-looking legislation, I think it's really important that it doesn't hinder innovation, because the issue is I can't really see an Uber starting up in Australia with all the different regulations that people have to comply with, and the 3 levels of governments and all that sometimes doesn't really help. So I think it's important that we set up a legal framework and stop depending on government as well. Government should probably take a leaf out of us and be a catalyst rather than actually trying to do quite a lot.
I'm just going to cut in there, folks, because our live stream is just about to cut over. Could you please thank Johan and Steve? And we're done. Thank you.